What happens when a man who bled for his country is told that the proof of his sacrifice is unwelcome in a court of law? What happens when his quiet honor is met with the loud arrogance of power? And what happens when that man, against all odds, refuses to be dishonored? The courtroom fell silent, a collective breath held in the stale, anxious air. 68-year-old Silas Thorne stood tall, his posture a ramrod of discipline forged over a lifetime. His weathered fingers, gnarled from work and war brushed against the Purple Heart, pinned to the breast of his dress blues. "Remove that decoration, or you will be held in contempt," Judge Alistair Finch snarled from the bench, his voice a whip-crack in the silence. Silas Thorne locked eyes with the judge, a man 20 years his junior, who had never known a day of service. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it filled every corner of the room with the weight of history. "This medal is not a decoration, Your Honor," he said, his words precise and clear. "It is a receipt, and it is paid in full." Before we continue this incredible story of one man's stand against a broken system, tell us in the comments where you're watching from in the world today. Has a member of your family ever served their country? And what does that service mean to you? And if you believe that some principles are worth fighting for, hit that subscribe button, because you are about to witness how one man's quiet dignity can shake an empire to its very foundations. Silas Thorne never intended to become a symbol. On that crisp autumn morning in Oakhaven County, he was simply a citizen answering the call of civic duty. The jury summons had arrived a week prior, and despite the gnawing electric pain in his right leg, a permanent, unwelcome souvenir from a firefight in a desert half a world away, he never once considered requesting an exemption. Responsibility was a language he understood better than any other. His morning routine was a ritual, a silent meditation on a life of service. He stood before his closet, the dress blues, hanging in a place of honor. As he slipped into the jacket, he wasn't just putting on clothes, he was donning a lifetime of memories. The fabric held the faint scent of polish and starch, but also of distant lands of sweat and fear, and of the unique camaraderie forged only in the crucible of combat. He meticulously polished the brass buttons until they gleamed, each one a small sun, reflecting the early morning light. Then came the medals. He arranged them with a surgeon's precision. Across his chest, a tangible map of his 32 years in the United States Army. Each ribbon and piece of metal told a story. The Bronze Star for leadership under fire when his commanding officer had fallen. The campaign ribbons from Desert Storm, each stripe representing blistering days and freezing nights. And finally, the Purple Heart. He held it for a moment, its weight familiar in his palm. It held the position of honor, a silent testament to that day in 1991 when an enemy bullet had torn through his flesh, but had failed to touch his spirit. It represented the moment he chose to charge forward, drawing fire away from his pinned-down squad, allowing 3 younger men to eventually go home to their families. To Silas, wearing his uniform to court was the highest form of respect he could pay to the judicial system, another institution he had sworn a sacred oath to defend with his life. He could not have known that this simple, heartfelt act of honor was about to set him on a collision course with the very system he revered. The Oakhaven County Courthouse stood imposing against the Alabama sky, its classical columns and stone facade designed to project authority and permanence. Inside Silas's highly polished dress shoes, clicked with a steady rhythmic cadence on the marble floors. He drew glances, some curious, some respectful, others whispering behind cupped hands. He was accustomed to the spectrum of reactions his uniform elicited. The jury assembly room buzzed with the low murmur of conversation, which quickly hushed as he entered. He found a seat near the back, his tall frame still military straight, an anchor of stillness in a sea of fidgeting citizens. Within minutes, as court officials began the voir dire process, Silas noticed a pattern. It was subtle, but unmistakable to a man trained to observe. Black candidates seemed to face a different line of questioning, a deeper scrutiny. Their answers were parsed, their backgrounds examined with a fine-toothed comb, and more often than not, they were dismissed for increasingly dubious reasons. He observed silently, his face, a mask of neutrality, a skill honed through decades of service under commanders of varying quality. Before his group was called, a bailiff, with a ruddy complexion and an ill-fitting uniform, approached, looking Silas up and down with undisguised skepticism. "You'll need to remove your costume before entering the courtroom," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching with a smirk. Silas met his gaze, his eyes steady. "This is not a costume, sir. This is the uniform of the United States Army, and these are my service medals earned during 32 years of service." The bailiff rolled his eyes. "Sure, Grandpa, whatever you say. Just take off the Halloween outfit before Judge Finch sees you." Before Silas could form a response, his group number was called. He rose, his dignity a shield his back as straight as a flagpole, and proceeded to courtroom 4A. The courtroom was the personal fiefdom of Judge Alastair Finch, a man whose reputation for rigid decorum and controversial rulings that disproportionately affected minorities preceded him like thunder before a storm. Finch had served on the bench for 15 years, his position secured by family wealth and political connections. His gaze, cold and assessing, immediately locked onto Silas as he entered, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the decorated uniform. Silas could feel the weight of that stare, the judgment it contained, but he kept his focus forward. He was a veteran of scrutiny far more dangerous than this. The case before them involved a young black man, barely 20, accused of shoplifting a jacket from an upscale boutique. Despite the minor nature of the alleged crime, the prosecutor was pushing for maximum penalties, citing a previous juvenile offense for truancy. The evidence seemed circumstantial at best, primarily the word of a store manager against the defendant's quiet pleas of innocence. Silas recognized the familiar, tragic pattern, having seen his own son face similar presumptions of guilt years earlier. During jury selection, Silas answered every question truthfully and succinctly. When the defense attorney asked if he could be impartial, he replied, "I have sworn an oath to uphold justice for all Americans, regardless of their background. That oath didn't expire with my service." Something in his calm, unwavering assurance seemed to satisfy both counsels, and Silas found himself selected for the jury, one of only 2 black jurors on a predominantly white panel. During a recess, Silas stood in the courthouse corridor, stretching his aching leg, when he overheard Judge Finch speaking in hushed tones to his clerk around the corner. "These people need to learn their place," Finch said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "Coming in here like they own the place. This isn't the 60s anymore. We have order now." The clerk's response was inaudible, but Finch's dismissive laugh carried. "Just make sure we keep the right kind of people on these juries. You know what I mean." Silas's face remained impassive, but his grip tightened on the head of his cane. He had heard similar sentiments whispered in officers' clubs, shouted in barracks, and implied in promotion board meetings. The words themselves no longer had the power to wound him, but the injustice they represented still burned like phosphorus. When court resumed, Finch's gaze kept returning to Silas, his irritation growing more palpable as the afternoon wore on. It was the Purple Heart that seemed to draw his specific ire, a vibrant splash of color that spoke of a reality the judge had never known. That night, Silas returned to his modest home in the historically black neighborhood of Smithfield. The house was a museum of a life well lived. Photos lined the walls. Silas as a young recruit, impossibly young and proud. Silas with his unit in Desert Storm, arms around buddies who wouldn't all make it home. Silas receiving his Purple Heart from a 4-star general. Silas with his late wife Evelyn on their 30th anniversary, her smile the light of his life. And Silas with his daughter Dr. Anya Sharma and his grandson Leo at the young man's high school graduation. Each image was a testament to a life dedicated to service family and doing what was right, even at great personal cost. The pain in his leg throbbed a constant dull ache. As he carefully hung his uniform, his fingers lingered on the Purple Heart. He had no way of knowing that tomorrow this small piece of metal and ribbon would become the centerpiece of a battle for dignity that would echo far beyond the walls of courtroom 4A. The next morning, Silas was summoned to the judge's chambers before proceedings began. The walk took him past portraits of previous judges, a sea of stern white faces, staring down from ornate frames. Finch's office was a shrine to privilege, leather-bound law books that looked as if they'd never been opened, lined mahogany shelves. Golf trophies occupied a place of prominence on a side table alongside photos of Finch with various powerful politicians and business leaders. The judge himself sat behind an imposing desk, his Rolex glinting under the recessed lighting. He did not rise when Silas entered. He did not offer a seat. "Mr. Thorne," Finch began without preamble, "your military regalia is inappropriate for my courtroom. It could be seen as an attempt to unduly influence other jurors to prejudice them toward your opinions during deliberations." Silas stood at parade rest, the position as natural to him as breathing. "With all due respect, Your Honor, there is no rule against wearing military decorations in a courtroom. I wear them not to influence, but to honor the oath I took to defend the Constitution, the same Constitution that guarantees the right to a fair trial." Finch's face tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "My courtroom, my rules, Mr. Thorne. I am the ultimate arbiter of decorum here. I want all medals and military insignia removed when you return tomorrow. Is that clear?" Silas took a measured breath, his gaze unwavering. "Sir, these medals represent 32 years of service to our country. This Purple Heart, in particular, was awarded after I nearly died, saving my unit from an ambush. 3 men went home to their families because of the actions recognized by this medal." Finch waved a dismissive hand, the gesture dripping with condescension. "We all make choices, Mr. Thorne. I chose law school, while others chose the military. Different paths, different rewards." The casual disregard, the equating of his sacrifice with a simple career choice, stung more than Silas expected. "May I ask, Your Honor, did you serve?" Finch's eyes narrowed to slits. "That's irrelevant. But since you ask, I received a deferment during Vietnam. My father felt my talents would be better served in the legal profession than wasted in the jungle. Wasted, Silas thought. The word hung in the air, thick and foul. He noticed the photos on the credenza again, of Finch at exclusive golf clubs, the kind that had fought integration for decades, the kind of places where a man like Silas would only be welcome as staff. Tomorrow no medals, Finch repeated, his tone indicating dismissal. Or you will be found in contempt. I will not have my authority challenged in my own courtroom. I understand your position, Your Honor. Silas said, his voice a model of military composure. He didn't agree, but 32 years in the army had taught him when to fight and when to strategize. This was a time for strategy. That evening, Silas sat at his kitchen table with his grandson Leo, a second-year law student at Howard University, home on break. Leo's youthful indignation was a fire that warmed Silas's heart. It's ridiculous, Grandpa, Leo said, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. There's no legal basis for his demand. Military decorations aren't prohibited. In fact, there are cases supporting your right to wear them. This is a clear abuse of power. He can't just make up rules because your presence, a decorated black veteran with unimpeachable dignity, makes him uncomfortable. Why do you think it bothers him so much? Silas mused, sipping his tea. The uniform, the medals, or just me? Leo looked up from his research, his expression serious. All of it. You represent something he can't buy or bully, genuine sacrifice, genuine respect. Men like Finch are used to controlling the narrative. Your very existence challenges his. Later that night, Silas visited Evelyn's grave at the Veterans Cemetery. The moonlight silvered the rows of identical headstones, a stark reminder of the democracy of death, if not always, of life. What would you tell me to do, Evie? He whispered, placing a small stone on her marker, a ritual of remembrance. In the profound stillness, he could almost hear her voice as clear and steady as it had been in life. Stand your ground, Silas Thorne. Stand your ground. On his way home, his daughter Anya called. Daddy, I heard what happened. You need to be careful. Finch has connections, real connections, the kind that can make problems for people who cross them. Anya had inherited her mother's directness and her father's unshakable sense of justice. As a community organizer, focusing on voter rights, she knew the power structures of Oakhaven intimately. I'm not looking to cross anyone, baby girl, Silas said, his voice weary. I'm just not willing to dishonor what these medals stand for. Before sleep claimed him, Silas made his decision. He would wear his medals tomorrow. He would stand his ground. But the question of the young defendant, Jamal Carter, nagged at him. What would happen to the boy if he were removed from the jury? The question followed him into uneasy dreams where he ran through desert sands that shifted into courthouse corridors, always pursuing a justice that seemed just beyond his reach. Day 3 arrived with a grey, weeping rain. Silas moved with deliberate calm, each action measured as he prepared for the coming confrontation. His uniform hung ready, the medals in their proper place, the Purple Heart catching the dim morning light as if it held its own fire. In the bathroom mirror, he saw his father's face looking back at him. The same determined, set to the jaw. The same unwavering gaze that had faced down segregation and served a country that often didn't serve him in return. Courtroom 4A was nearly full when he entered, unusual for a routine shoplifting case. He noted several unfamiliar faces, including a young Asian woman with a reporter's notebook partially concealed in her lap. It was Isabel Vega. Judge Finch's entrance silenced the room. He took his seat, arranged his robes, and then looked directly at Silas. His eyes immediately locked onto the row of medals, and his face flushed a deep mottled red. "Mr. Thorne," Finch called out, his voice sharp and loud, interrupting the clerk's opening procedures. "Approach the bench." Silas rose steadily, using his cane for support, and walked forward. The courtroom had gone completely silent. "I instructed you to remove those medals, Mr. Thorne," Finch said, his voice ringing with theatrical indignation. "You have deliberately disobeyed a direct order from this court." Silas stood straight, his voice clear, and carrying to every corner of the room. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I am not in full uniform today. I have chosen to wear only my Purple Heart, which was awarded to me after I was wounded in combat, defending our nation's interests and saving the lives of my fellow soldiers." Finch's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the bench. "Remove it now. Mr. Thorne or I will find you in contempt of court." In that moment, Silas saw not just Judge Finch, but every obstacle he had ever faced every time he'd been told to make himself smaller, less visible, less deserving. "This medal represents blood I shed for the Constitution that governs this very courtroom," Silas said, his voice steady as a rock. "I cannot and will not dishonor that sacrifice." The gavel came down with a crack like a gunshot. "You are in contempt of this court, bailiff. Remove Mr. Thorne from the jury pool immediately. Mr. Thorne, you are fined $1,000. Pay the clerk on your way out." As the bailiff approached, looking deeply uncomfortable, something unprecedented happened. An elderly white man in the back row stood up, then a middle-aged woman beside him, then a young black man near the door. Within seconds, half the courtroom was standing in silent solidarity. Finch's face contorted in rage. "Sit down, all of you, sit down now, or you will join Mr. Thorne in contempt." Slowly, reluctantly, people retook their seats. But the message had been delivered. Silas walked out with his head held high, leaning on his cane but unbowed. In the corridor, Isabel Vega caught up to him. Her article published that afternoon went viral. The battle had begun. "What would you do if you were in Silas's shoes?" Comment: Number 1, if you believe he was right to keep his Purple Heart on, or Number 2, if you think he should have followed the judge's orders. Hit a like if you respect the sacrifices of our veterans, and subscribe to hear how this confrontation escalates in ways no one could have predicted. Judge Richard Barrett had never faced public scrutiny of this magnitude. The deluge of calls and emails forced his clerk to disconnect the office phone. Veterans groups from across the country issued statements of condemnation. Sensing an opportunity, the defendant's lawyer filed a motion for Barrett to recuse himself, citing bias. Barrett, a man unaccustomed to retreat, doubled down. He issued a formal statement decrying Silas's grandstanding and its undermining effect on the impartial administration of justice. He doubled the fine and threatened imprisonment. The retaliation was swift and systemic. William Hargrove, the court administrator, visited Silas's home, offering a compromise. The fine would be reduced if Silas issued a public apology. "For the good of the system," Mr. Thorne Hargrove urged. "What does it say about the system?" Silas replied calmly, "If it demands I apologize for wearing a medal that represents my sacrifice for it." Next came a friendly visit from Detective James Morrison of the Birmingham Police. His casual tone belied the implied threat, as he mentioned Anya's community organizing and the scrutiny such situations can bring. The message was clear: your family is not off limits. Soon after Leo's law school scholarship was suddenly placed under review. Silas's military pension payment, a lifeline, failed to arrive, his account frozen for an administrative review. The pressure mounted. A whisper campaign, fueled by Barrett's allies, began questioning Silas's military record. Tanya was passed over for a promotion by a board member who golfed with Finch every Sunday. Silas felt the weight of his stand pressing down on those he loved most. But then a call from Shanice Williams, the mother of the young defendant, strengthened his resolve. This system isn't built for boys who look like my son or men who look like you. Mr. Thorne, she said, through tears. Thank you for not backing down. That evening, he returned home from a VFW meeting to find his front door spray-painted with racial slurs. Before he could react, neighbors emerged from their homes with paint remover and brushes, a silent, multiracial coalition working to erase the ugliness. The turning point came when Isabel Vega published her most explosive expose yet, titled The Court of King Barrett. The investigation laid bare the judge's history of financial conflicts of interest and systematic discrimination. Most damning was an audio recording provided by a former court clerk turned whistleblower. On it, Barrett's voice was unmistakable. These people think a uniform and some medals make them special. The judge sneered. Freeman needs to learn his place just like the rest of them. The recording shattered Barrett's carefully constructed persona. The FBI announced a preliminary inquiry into civil rights violations. The Department of Justice opened a separate investigation. Facing mounting pressure, Judge Finch was forced to recuse himself from Jamal Carter's case. The new judge dismissed all charges, citing insufficient evidence. Support for Silas swelled into a national movement. A joint statement, signed by 5 former Secretaries of Defense, condemned Finch's actions. Captain James Whitfield, a white veteran whose life Silas had saved in Desert Storm, came forward publicly, his testimony of Silas's heroism silencing the smear campaign. The Army, in an unusual move, released Silas's full exemplary service records. Stressed and worn, Silas's health deteriorated, and he was hospitalized with complications from his war injuries. The news that the decorated veteran was in the hospital without his active VA benefits still frozen created another wave of public outrage. From his hospital bed, Silas gave his first public statement. This was never about me or one judge, he said, his voice weak but resolute. It was about whether we truly honor sacrifice, regardless of who makes it. It was about whether the Constitution I nearly died defending applies equally to all Americans. The tide had turned completely. Governor Robert Callaway, once Finch's staunch defender, held a press conference to distance himself from the embattled judge. The State Judicial Ethics Committee, which had been slow to act, accelerated its investigation. Faced with irrefutable evidence of misconduct, a federal investigation, and collapsing support, Judge Alistair Finch resigned in disgrace. In the aftermath, over 200 of Finch's past cases were flagged for review due to suspected bias. Walter, with the help of donations that had poured in, established the Thorne Veterans Justice Initiative, with Leo as its director, to provide free legal assistance to veterans facing discrimination. Months later, Silas stood before a congressional committee. In his calm, measured testimony, he detailed not just his own ordeal, but the systemic issues it represented. His stand led directly to the drafting of the Thorne Respect Act, bipartisan legislation designed to protect veterans in legal proceedings and strengthen judicial accountability. 1 year after he first walked into that Oak Haven courtroom, Silas Thorne stood in the East Room of the White House. He was in his full-dress uniform, his Purple Heart, gleaming as the president signed the Thorne Respect Act into law. Surrounding him were veterans from all walks of life, and beside him stood Jamal Carter, the young man whose case had been the catalyst, now working for Silas's foundation. Across town, a disbarred Richard Finch watched the ceremony on television. Months earlier, in a moment of clarity, born from total disgrace, he had written a letter to Silas, a genuine handwritten apology. My order was about my own discomfort with a black man whose sacrifice and dignity commanded respect. I was unwilling to give, he wrote. You deserved better from me and from the system. Silas had met with him once, a brief, private meeting, not of forgiveness, but of accountability and closure. On the anniversary of Evelyn's death, Silas sat beside her grave. The veterans' cemetery was peaceful in the autumn light. We did something important, Evie, he said, softly, his Purple Heart pinned to his jacket as always. Our grandkids will grow up in a slightly more just world because of it. Not perfect, not even close, but better. Silas Thorne's legacy was not just in the law bearing his name. It was in the powerful truth he had demonstrated that dignity cannot be commanded away, that respect must be given to be received, and that the systems of justice only work when people of conscience insist they live up to their ideals. He had proven that the quiet courage of one good man could be more powerful than the loud authority of a corrupt one. And in doing so, he had defended his country once more. Has there been a moment in your life when you had to choose between standing your ground on principle or taking the easier path? Walter's story reminds us that sometimes one person's quiet dignity can change an entire system. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more stories of moral courage, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Thank you for joining us. Remember, justice doesn't defend itself. It needs people like you